The year 2000, the Obasanjo administration conceived the plan of how to increase the transparency, responsibility and revenue in the oil and gas sector with a petroleum industry bill. It was eventually sent to the National Assembly in 2008 for deliberation. It was reintroduced in 2012 to the 7th National Assembly. Many argued that it has been replaced. Some pointed out new clauses. Now, these arguments dragged on till the end of the tenure of those lawmakers, despite it being passed on the floor of the House of Representatives. Fast forward to 2017, the new iteration of the bill, as the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, was passed by the Senate. The House of Representatives passed it a year later in 2018. Now, the last and final version passed its first reading in the Senate in 2020. And after intense consideration with some form of lobbying, the 9th Assembly passed the PIB on July 1, 2021. I am Lekon Onobanjo, standing in for Tolulope Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. And joining me on the program is Bola Adigun. She's a partner at Deloitte & Touch. Bola is also the Energy Resource and Industrials Leader for Financial Advisory for Deloitte Africa. She's an experienced corporate finance professional with focus on oil and gas, and she has over 12-year experience advising on projects across the oil and gas value chain. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, Bola.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
All right, so we are actually considering the industry bill, that is the petroleum industry bill that has just been passed. And we'd like to set precedents for this conversation. Let me put it to you now. Now, the bill itself has gone under many iterations over the past 14 years thereabouts, looking at its lifespan in the Nigeria's parliament. Now, are the changes that looking at the changes now that have happened throughout the bill, would you say is a necessity, or would you say is due to the situations, the ever-changing factors as consisted in the sector that has resulted in this long period of changes and, of course, what we eventually have as of now?
Okay, thank you very much. You know, the oil and gas industry is a very unique one, and it's an industry that has different stakeholders and interests. And like you rightly pointed out, the bill has gone through several iterations and edits in order to properly capture the interests and requirements of the different stakeholder groups. And what do I mean? So you have the producers, you have the off-takers, you have the financiers, you have the regulators, you have the host community. So you have a lot of stakeholders in the industry. And the bill has gone through these several iterations to ensure that the interests of these groups are properly captured. That's one. Secondly, you want a bill that is able to attract the right kind and size of investment into the Nigerian oil and gas space. And I think part of the iteration has been to ensure that the bill is elastic enough to be able to reflect the realities of the current market and to be able to ensure that it drives the right kind and size of investments. You know that the Nigerian oil and gas industry requires billions of dollars to maximize our offshore potentials. So I think part of the iterations of the bill is to ensure that it meets this requirement and it is elastic enough. Thank you.
All right, looking at the bill now, we are made to understand that NNPC is to be divided into 3 components. Now, would a definite timeline be given for this sort of compartmentalization of NNPC?
Okay, so I think part of the basis for the split of the NNPC is to ensure that you have commercially focused and viable entities. And you also address potential conflict of interest, where you're also a player and a regulator. And the split is to ensure that the NNPC is able to operate in an efficient and effective manner. Now, the bill and the government have mentioned timelines for the implementation of this split. And we hope that those timelines are going to be adhered to. But yes, I think the split is necessary to reflect the current realities of our market and also what is applicable or obtainable in other climes in terms of the oil and gas space. So the timelines have been set by the government, And we hope that those timelines are going to be adhered to at the end of the day. Thank you.
All right, let's move on now. Now, one of the issues, or one of the main reasons why these bills are to come into effect, is the issue of transparency and accountability. They are very germane to the petroleum industry bill. Now, do you expect this new bill to adhere to this? Do you think it has what it takes to ensure that the operations in this sector are transparent enough? And are you saying, or are you also in tandem with what some people are actually saying as regards accountability, that this bill will ensure accountability of all the spendings and all the fundings going into the sector?
Okay, so the bill in itself provides for transparency and accountability. And because of the critical role the oil and gas industry plays to Nigeria's foreign revenue generation, FX generation, it's critical that the industry is transparent enough to provide confidence to any player, any investor, any stakeholder group. Having said that, the reality of the matter is that whether the transparency of the transparency will be dependent on the operationalization and the implementation of the bill. So the bill in itself, the way it is structured, allows for and provides for the transparency and aspirations of the country. But the reality would then be dependent on when it is implemented and how it is enforced. Thank you.
Now, talking about implementation and enforcement, what are those things? What are those critical elements you think should come into play? Because we could talk about what we want to do, and we could talk about how to get it done. Of course, there probably might be bottlenecks and all that. But then when you talk about enforcement, implementation, what are those factors you think should be put in place to ensure that these come into being?
So, I mean, a critical component of enforcement is stakeholder buy-in. Right? You're going to be enforcing against operators, oil and gas companies across the value chain. And to the extent that you have their buy-in, compliance would be easier. And also, where the government demonstrates transparency in its own operations and in its own accountability, then enforcement becomes easier because there's a lot of confidence from the people that you are enforcing against. So stakeholder buy-in is very, very critical. Transparency is very, very critical. Clearly defined fiscal regime or policies are also very critical. And if you have all of those in place, I think compliance and enforcement should be smooth, should not be a challenge or a problem. Thank you.
All right, so let's quickly consider what the National Bureau of Statistics has put out in terms of data. Now, it's been revealed that only $53.5 million, or let's say 0.55% of total investment of $9.680 billion in Nigeria last year was made in the industry. Now, would the passage of this bill bring in more investments, looking at the year 2021 and pushing forward?
Interesting question. You see, depending on who you speak with in the industry, the different stakeholder groups have different perspective of the impact of the PIB in attracting investment to the sector. I mean, when you talk to the IOCs, when you talk to the independent or the local producers, the Nigerian indigenous oil and gas companies, when you talk to financiers, both local and international, when you talk to strategic partners, they have different perspective as regards the ability of the PIB to attract significant investment into the sector. Some complain that in the long run, they have to pay more taxes, and some other investments or some other regions may become better viable. But a major positive impact of the passage of the bill is that it eliminates uncertainties. You know, we've been on this bill for several years now. The passage of the bill eliminates uncertainties, wherein it is clear what the fiscal terms are, whether you are operating at upstream, midstream, or downstream. It is clear what the fiscal regimes are, whether you are operating onshore or offshore, whether it's a marginal field or a block, or, you know, so the fiscal regime is clear. So that, I think, is a major positive. I remember speaking with one of the MDs of the IOC some time ago, and he mentioned that the PIB not being passed was a major impediment to attracting investment, for them to reach final investment decisions on certain projects. So now that the PIB has been passed, I think that uncertainty is no longer existing, and we hope that that should translate into faster investment decisions into the space. Thank you.
All right, Bola, you have to stay with us for a while. We are going to take a break. Well, of course, you've listened to Bola talking about the passage of the Petroleum Industry Bill. A whole lot of positives to take out of that. Of course, a whole lot of situations attached to it also that we also need to look into. One of those is the gas reserves and how Nigeria can spread its investments to ensure that it is even and it cuts across all borders. It is still Business Edge. Do stay with us. We'll be back after this break. Still with me on Business Edge is Bola Adigun, who is a senior partner at Deloitte and Torch. We've been taking a look at the industry bill, that is the Petroleum Industry Bill, and we've been considering what it means for the oil and gas sector. Now, back to Bola. Hello, Bola, are you still there?
Absolutely, I'm here.
Okay, so we just take you that way. Let's move on to the gas aspect now of what we're talking about. Looking at the gas reserves, considering the recent discovery of more gas reserves in Nigeria, more possibilities of earning and production of LPG seem definite in Nigeria, for Nigeria, and of course for Nigerians. But then, how would you advise the government to spread its investments for this, what is called 206 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves? How should government go about spreading the investments to ensure that it is even, and of course it cuts across all the bottles of all the bottles of investment, so to speak?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Nigerian government, like most countries, does not have infinite resources. Like the same president mentioned recently, Nigeria is not as buoyant as some may anticipate or expect. So the only way that the gas potential of this country can be properly harnessed and maximized is by private sector participation. And I think with regards to that, the government has made some steps in the right direction. By declaring the decade of gas, there's a lot of activities or initiatives by the federal government and the NNPC and Ministry of Petroleum Resources regards to gas utilization, gas expansion, and gas processing. So I think the way to properly maximize our gas potential is by ensuring private sector participation and then diversifying that across the different gas value chain. And like I said, the government is making some steps in the right direction. You have the National Gas Expansion Program that's currently ongoing. There's also the gas, utilization program that are also ongoing. So I think there are steps in the right direction, and it is the private sector that needs to work with the government to ensure that our gas potentials are properly harnessed and are properly maximized. I mean, the revenue that we can generate from gas are significant. And it's only when we start to properly harness and maximize these potentials that we can start to see the dividends that we expect. Thank you.
All right, now talking about dividends, do you think there should be some form of regulation when you have private partners coming into play? Do you think there should be some of regulation so that it's a win-win situation both for government and of course these private parties that might come on board, as you have suggested?
Of course, absolutely. And even the fiscal regime as it is currently allows for a win-win situation wherein the private sector is able to recoup their investment and make some return. And also the government is able to make some money out of get some benefits. And also the host community. So it certainly has to be a win-win. Otherwise you have a stakeholder conflict, which would result in, which will not give us the kind of results that we are expecting. Thank you.
All right, now let me drag you into this. We would have to drag you into this. Now, Nigeria actually just won a major litigation against Ghana for a debt owed. They will be paying about $70 million in debt owed West Africa Gas Limited. Now, this is timely, of course. It's business, but then it's timely. It's the reality of business, you would agree with me. Now, looking at the new iteration in the Petroleum Industry Bill. Now, NNPC would also be liable to be sued for any wrongdoing in the near future. That is the implication of the passage of the PIB now. Now, how do you think this will influence the sector, and how do you think it will influence the operation of the NNPC?
So, I mean, personally, right, I don't see the PIB having that much, I don't see much changes coming out of as a result of the PIB in terms of ability of the NNPC to sue or be sued. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a corporate entity, right? And with the capacity and the potential to be sued and to sue. The aspect I see from this case, however, is the sanctity of contracts. Sanctity of contract being that I know that if I have a contract against you, I can enforce that contract, right? And I can get judgment in my interest or in my favor when I choose to enforce the contract. What that does is that it increases the confidence in the sector, increases some confidence of potential investors that are not currently playing in the Nigerian market and are worried around and are concerned around the sanctity of our system, of our court of contract. So from that perspective, it's a plus because it ensures that there's confidence in our system, there's confidence in the sector, and that contracts are going to be honored. Thank you.
All right. I would like to take your reaction also this particular aspect. Now, during debate, during plenary, there were issues of 2.5%, 5%, or probably 3% to be approved for the host communities. They've eventually settled for 3%. Now, is this percentage adequate to change the wrongs of the past for the host communities now?
You know what I found? I mean, talking about the wrongs of the past, maybe, I mean, I would not want to speak to the wrongs of the past. However, the positives that you have from the 3% is that it sets a minimum amount. You know, with upstream projects, you have different percentages. I mean, I've worked in the upstream space for about 10 years, and you see different MOUs where you have 5%, 1%, 3%, 10%. What the 3% in the PIB does is that it has set a minimum amount. And on that minimum amount, upstream players can then build on that. Now, is the 3% enough to wrong all the issues of the past? Maybe, maybe not. But it sets a minimum amount that will start to improve community relations between producers and host community. And you would agree with me that where you have cordial relationship between host community and players, we can increase our production because you have less security challenges. So I think the 3% or having a certain amount set aside for host community is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
All right, so finally, your thoughts now, looking at the bill holistically, would you say this is a magic wand when it comes to solving, well, maybe all the problems in the petroleum industry bill? Would you say this is a quick fix? This will address all the issues as regards the petroleum industry and, of course, the operations of the oil and gas sector?
So, I mean, your choice of words are very interesting. So there's no magic wand anywhere. The issues in the oil and gas industry are complex and they require a phased approach, right? Because you cannot solve all the problems at the same time. Now, if you go via a phased approach in resolving some of the challenges in the sector, then the passage of the bill is certainly a step in the right direction. And then it's for the state or for the government to then build on this in a phased manner. So you pick an issue, you resolve it. You pick another issue, you resolve it. So is the PIB passage going to be the magic one to solve all the problems in the industry? Absolutely not. Is it a step in the right direction? And is it going to help us in a phased manner to resolve some of the challenges that we know that have become very troublesome in the industry? Absolutely. So my perspective is that the PIB is a step in the right direction. It's for the state, for the players, for the stakeholder groups to then build on this to gradually resolve some of the challenges that we have so that we have a very functional industry that's able to attract the right kind and type of investment and size and is able to properly meet the requirements and needs of the average Nigerian. Thank you.
All right, thank you so very much, Bola, for joining this conversation. Well, as it appears, it might not be able to solve all the problems, but then it's a right step in the right direction, according to Bola. And of course, it's a step at a time. One thing she actually mentioned, which we all can hold on to, is the fact that we need to be thorough when it comes to implementation and enforcement of the provisions of the PIB. All right, Bola, we appreciate you for joining us on Business Edge. Coming up next is NC4 to watch. Looking at the major stories now on NC4 to watch, we start with Kenya Airways. Well, Kenya Airways has reduced flights frequency to Entebbe, Uganda from 12 to 9 weekly, citing an upsurge of COVID-19 in the country and strict government containment measures which have reduced travel demand. Kenya Airways has previously also slashed the frequency of its flights to New York from 2 to 1 weekly, citing a decline in demand since resuming operations on the route of November 29, 2020, after the lifting of COVID-19 restrictions. We move on now. A Ghanaian-based African-led agribusiness startup called Green Gold Farms has raised $1.6 million from Absa Bank Ghana, Diaspora Capital, Channel Ventures, EPMT Fund, and a number of early-stage seed investors. Now, the startup is tackling the problems of poverty, lack of economic opportunity, and malnutrition, including related illnesses in northern Ghana through large-scale agricultural production. Now, let's talk about SoftBank. Japan's SoftBank Corporation and Rwanda's Smart Africa Secretariat have entered a memorandum of understanding to collaborate on innovative solutions towards achieving the vision of providing affordable broadband. Through this partnership, SoftBank and Smart Africa will work to bridge the digital divide by providing accessible and affordable internet connectivity to Africa's undeserved and underserved regions. Through various projects and activities, Smart Africa has an ambitious strategy to double broadband penetration to 51% in Africa by the year 2025. And finally, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries has said that the demand for crude oil will gain momentum in the second half of 2021. OPEC Secretary General Mohamed Barkindo disclosed this at the 31st meeting of the Joint Ministerial Monitoring Committee, which was held via video conference. He said oil demand is forecast to grow by 6 million barrels per day to around 96.6 million barrels per day on average for the year. And that is the size of our package on Business Edge. You can join the conversation by comment on all our social media platforms. You can drop a comment. We'd like to hear from you. Thank you so much for being a part of the program, Business Edge. I am Lekon Onobanjo. See you again some other time.